Who gets to run Seattle? Big business, the Chamber of Commerce and the real estate lobby, or working people?
People in Seattle, particularly in District 3, are tired of that sort of leadership.
This is a big task we have today.
Kshama Sawant is running for a third term on the Seattle City Council.
I want to look at the facts.
But challenger Egan Orion says he's a better fit for the job.
If we want Seattle to be a much more equal city, then we need to fight on the ground.
Both candidates weigh in.
Movements are great, but we need representation now in District 3.
Rallying to represent District 3. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Kshama Sawant is one of the most recognized names in local politics, but her quest for a third term on the Seattle City Council won't be easy. Egan Orion is Sawant's well-connected and well-funded opponent, who says he's the better choice for the council's District 3 position. It's a struggle between an incumbent who's all about political movements and a challenger who believes District 3 wants more locally grounded leadership. Kshama Sawant knows how to rally her supporters.
Good morning, everyone.
And now, this Socialist Alternative Party icon is rallying again, seeking a third term on the Seattle City Council and asking voters to answer this challenging question.
Who gets to run Seattle? Big business, the Chamber of Commerce and the real estate lobby, or working people?
Up against 5 opponents in the August primary, Sawant pulled in about 37% of the vote, the lowest percentage of any of the 3 incumbents running this fall.
I'm quite confident I'll do fine.
Sawant won a seat on the Seattle City Council in 2013 by defeating incumbent Richard Conlon. She then defended her seat in 2015 with a convincing win over Pamela Banks to represent District 3, from the Central District out to Lake Washington.
What we're seeing is the unprecedented affordable housing crisis.
Sawant is still battling for economic equity. She says her successful fight in 2014 for a $15 minimum wage,
the people united,
a failed attempt at an employee head tax, and her continuing work on renters' rights are just starting points in a struggle against politics as usual.
The political establishment has failed to bring up solutions, and that is why we need to continue building these movements, and that is why it is critical that progressive candidates run this year, like myself.
Sawant is endorsed by the King County Young Democrats, the Sierra Club, and Seattle City Council member Mike O'Brien, who is not seeking re-election this fall.
We have a Chamber of Commerce candidate, a corporate bankroll candidate in every race.
Sawant has raised more than $324,000 for her campaign as of mid-September. Thus far, the most for any city council candidate this year, without the use of Seattle's Democracy Voucher program. But she's very concerned about political action committee spending. Her opponent, Egan Orion, has more PAC support than any other council candidate. Over $184,000 from groups like CASE, the Seattle Chamber's political arm. PACs have spent less than $100 to support Sawant's campaign.
The Chamber of Commerce, Amazon, the real estate lobby, they are all ganging up against working people and trying to buy this election.
I want to look at the facts.
Egan Orion says the race for D3 is not about a political movement.
People in Seattle, particularly in District 3, are tired of that sort of leadership.
Orion is a business owner and longtime resident of Capitol Hill, who says it's time for a change.
Our current council member in District 3, Kshama Sawant, has failed to address some of the biggest issues facing our city.
Those issues, Orion says, like homelessness and affordability, require a political leader who knows how to work with other people.
I've proven throughout my career I can work collaboratively with folks, which is something that's not happening right now with the current council member.
Orion is the organizer of Seattle's Pride Fest, growing the local LGBTQ celebration from 10,000 people to 200,000 people over the past 12 years. In the 6-way August primary, he gained 21% of the vote, 15 points behind Sawant. Orion's endorsements include Teamsters 117, the LGBTQ Victory Fund, and the Seattle Times. And when it comes to campaign fundraising, Orion has raised over $206,000 as of mid-September, more than any other non-incumbent candidate this fall. 47% of those dollars come from democracy vouchers.
There's real issues going on across the district.
Orion says D3 voters are asking him about public safety concerns, construction issues around Highway 520, and the need for more homeless shelters. Local problems that he says need a more locally focused council member.
Rather than looking about how I can create a movement nationwide, no. The people of District 3 want someone that's on the ground here, working every day to represent their interests and tackle the challenges that they face.
Can Kshama Sawant rally her troops once again? Or will Egan Orion take control of District 3? Two high-energy, amply funded campaigns say they have the answer to that question this November.
This election is about winning a progressive city hall.
I can work across organizations and communities to get big stuff done.
And here are the candidates for District 3, Councilmember Kshama Sawant, and we also have with us Egan Orion. Thank you very much for joining us. We had a coin flip before the show. Kshama, you'll be speaking first. Why are you running to represent District 3 for a third term here?
Thank you so much. What's at stake this year is who runs Seattle, big business or working people. We know corporate PACs are trying to undemocratically buy this election and attempt to flip City Hall to the right. We cannot let them do that. And the corporate PACs, which include money from wealthy Republicans, have spent the most against my campaign in District 3 of all the districts. Why is that? Because my office has shown it is possible to get elected, and it is possible to use your office to build coalitions and unity in the grassroots to win victories that were previously thought of as impossible. And you do that by building movements. So we won the historic $15 minimum wage. We have won landmark renters' rights victories, and we won the Indigenous Peoples Day. We cannot afford to go backward in this city, so I'm urging everybody to join me in fighting for the Green New Deal for Seattle's working people, for rent control free of corporate loopholes, and to tax big businesses like Amazon so we can fund a massive expansion of publicly owned, high-quality social housing.
Thank you very much for that. Egan, why are you running for District 3?
I'm running to return representation to the people of District 3, to all communities within it. I have a long history in District 3. In my 20s, I worked 3 minimum wage jobs and was a longtime renter. And, you know, I really struggled to make ends meet. So I appreciate what's going on in today's Seattle with workers. As someone who started 2 small businesses from the district, I know intimately the headwinds that small businesses face with regulations, with taxes, and with displacement itself. So I'm running to bring more representation to those issues. I also think that, you know, with all due respect to Councilmember Sawant, that she's had 6 years to tackle a lot of these big issues, and many of them have just gotten worse under her tenure. I think it's time to have someone at City Council who can work collaboratively, because there's some big challenges, homelessness, transportation, housing, that we really need to get tackled, and I believe I'm the person to really move those issues forward.
Thank you for that. In our setup piece, I brought up an issue that I think is really central to this campaign: different governing styles. I tried to describe them. We heard a few sound bites from you, but I really do want you to help us portray the different political approaches. How would you describe the differences between you and your opponent, and how you would govern if you're elected? Egan, you first.
Sure. First of all, you know, I appreciate leaders like Kshama Sawant who expand the boundaries of our political speech. I think that definitely at a time and a place serves a great role to really capture the imagination of people about what's possible. But there's other times when we really just need to get back to work. And to work well with others. I think at all levels of government. We have this expanded partnership with the county on the homelessness crisis. There's issues like around rent control, rent stabilization that can only be done at the state level. There's other issues with the port, and I think that having those strong relationships is key, and that's something that I've proven throughout my career. It's how I built PrideFest to the largest civic event in Seattle, is working collaboratively.
Okay. Kshama, your thoughts about this, the major differences between you and your opponent when it comes to this political approach, and how you would govern if you were elected again?
I think it's very clear from the nearly 6 years that we've been in office that it is absolutely crucial we have more not fewer representatives like myself. That's why I'm urging voters in every district to elect the progressives in their district, not the corporate bankroll candidate, because all the evidence that we have of candidates who are backed by corporate cash, we know that those candidates are beholden to corporate interests once they get into office. I mean, I can give you endless examples, but the most recent example is Mayor Jenny Durkin. She was bankrolled by the same corporate interests, real estate, telecom giants, PSC that does not want the Green New Deal, Amazon, the same corporations that are backing my opponent in this district backed her. And what did we see? We see a mayor that is singularly unrepresentative of working people's interests and is representative of big business.
Okay.
We saw that most spectacularly, unfortunately, and most shamefully in the role that she played in repealing the Amazon tax that we had won. So it was so hard fought for. And in fact, it's absolutely crucial to build unity. It is absurd to say that you can accomplish anything without unity. But the crucial question here is unity is not a neutral point. It's unity with whom?
Okay.
Amazon and big business showed they don't want any unity with working people because they went to war against a very modest tax. So we need to build unity on the ground, the kind we have built in order to win the victories we have won.
Thank you for that. Egan, I want to make sure that you're able to respond here. You've heard these criticisms, maybe some other critics too, the influence of political action committee dollars, especially on this race. PACs, specifically the Seattle Chamber's case group, supporting you more than any other candidate. What does that mean? How do you respond to that criticism?
I think it's less about me and more about my opponent. I think, there was a Guardian interview that I did a few weeks ago when they asked me, will you be better for business than Kshama Sawant? And I said, a bologna sandwich would be better for business than Kshama. And, I will be much better in terms of my relationships because it's the kind of work that I've been doing for a long time. And it's not just big business, it's small business. I work closely with small businesses on Capitol Hill to make our commercial corridors prosperous and safe and someplace that people want to go and hang out. They're core to our neighborhoods. So, I think that government can work with business. Government can work with the nonprofit sector. They can work with developers. It's all about solutions, right? If you want to get something done, you got to see what you're trying to tackle and then get stakeholders who can actually achieve those things.
Okay. Kshama, I know you have a response to that, and I'm going to follow up with some campaign fundraising in a little bit, but briefly, if you could.
Absolutely. My opponent said that a bologna sandwich would be a better representative for big business, a better partner for big business than me. With a badge of honor, I declare my solidarity with ordinary working people and small businesses and middle-class homeowners, not big business. In fact, it's not surprising to me, but it's quite fascinating for me to see somebody so eager to be big business's bologna sandwich. And ultimately, I think we have to be very honest. The interests of small businesses, especially struggling immigrant-owned, LGBTQ-owned, women-owned small businesses, are not at all in alignment with the interests of big business. We are talking about the real estate lobby, corporate, property management corporations. And just to give you a concrete example, Saba, which is a restaurant, immigrant-owned Ethiopian restaurant in the Central District, has been economically evicted by the same kind of corporate real estate interests that have donated handsomely to my opponent directly in his campaign and also in the corporate PAC. So we have to, we need representation for small businesses, not big business.
I understand. Brief response,
I will make it quick. It's, in my view, the way things work better is, when you have workers and businesses represented. It's not workers or business, because business, they need workers and workers need business. So how do you balance those two constituencies? And so with this sort of us versus them mentality, we don't really get down to solving solutions, solving problems.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to make sure that we move on, if we can, and talk about plans for our homeless crisis, which I know all the candidates have been talking about this fall. Egan, you've come out in support of something called Right to Shelter, which is used in New York City. I know you talked with me about this earlier. It's a controversial idea, and I know an expensive one too. What is this? How would it work? How would Seattle pay for it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no doubt that we're spending a lot of money in our current system and cycling people in and out of a system that doesn't always produce the best outcomes. So what Right to Shelter does, if we enshrine that in our city charter, it sort of makes us do what we should be doing in the first place, which is providing shelter and housing for all who need it.
Got it.
Yeah. And so, we can take the money that we're using for the system that doesn't work and apply it to that. I actually have a program to bond with the county for $500 million for 1,500 new permanent supportive housing units that have wraparound services, mental health, addiction, counseling, job training, to help people get back on their feet.
Okay. Right to shelter, can we talk about that? And then we'll talk about some of your ideas and we'll go back and forth.
The right to shelter is absolutely an uncontroversial idea as far as the vast majority of ordinary people are concerned. Ordinary people, whether housed or homeless, agree completely that housing should be a human right and is a human right. However, establishing a right on paper is no different than the city already having said that there's a housing emergency. That has been declared. So this is just election year symbolism. Ultimately, the question is whether you're talking about a bond or any other solution. The crucial question here that the chamber-backed candidates in this election year, are refusing to answer is how will they pay for it? And we have to bring in the question of taxing big business. Why? Because Seattle is the nation's regressive taxation capital. It has the most regressive tax system in the entire nation. So middle-class homeowners, working people, and small businesses are disproportionately paying. And this is what I will say. The same forces that viciously went after the Amazon tax, the moderate tax that we would have used to fund housing and services, are the same corporate forces that are donating to my opponent and to chamber-backed candidates in every race. So how will these candidates actually solve the housing crisis?
Clearly, you're in support of a head tax, and I know this from the past several months. Egan, I want to make sure you weigh in on the idea of a head tax because I've heard some other candidates talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, what we saw with the head tax debate, what was revealed in that discussion was that the residents of Seattle didn't have trust that the city council knew how to spend the money that it's been given because they had not proven themselves on being able to tackle the big challenges around the homelessness crisis. Now, I totally agree that that working people, the middle class in Seattle, small businesses are paying way too much of their share, and that's why you see displacement. That's why you see economic instability with those families and those businesses, and they cannot be asked to pay anymore. So I'm totally in favor of progressive taxation, and I think that if business will need to pay more at a certain point. I think that the wealthy in this town will have to pay more. I'm interested to see what happens with our
the income tax
the
proposal
income tax in the state Supreme Court.
That's a piece too. Briefly, if you could, I'd like to cover some other issues
just to clarify, the income tax proposal is in the courts right now and making progress because our movement, my office, Councilmember Herbold's office, we fought for this against the opposition of big business and other wealthy households of any progressive taxation. But look, it's very simple. These are falsehoods being peddled by Seattle Times and the corporate candidates that there was no plan. Of course, there was a plan. The problem that Jeff Bezos and billionaires had with the Amazon tax was not that there was no plan. Of course, we were going to fund housing and services. The problem that they had was it was a tax on them. It was a tax on wealthy corporations. That's what they did not like. And it's very clear. It's not complicated. Let's make it very simple. Because reality is very clear. Mayor Jenny Durkin got $350,000 from Amazon for her election campaign. Boom, she forces the tax to be repealed. It's not a mystery.
Let's bring it back from the mayor's race to this election. What we're talking about this race. I understand. Please, Egan.
And I didn't say that they didn't have a plan. I said that the voters didn't trust them to enact that plan.
But you're still peddling the talking point, Seattle Times talking point, that they didn't have a plan, even though you think they have a plan. If you think they have a plan, then why do you say
about a plan. I just said that there wasn't trust, and I think that that's clear that the voters still don't have trust in the city council.
I want to make sure that I try to move on, if I can, some ideas about affordable housing. I know, Egan, you've talked about building more duplexes and fourplexes in single-family neighborhoods. That's a bit of a controversial idea. You also want developers to pay more for the cost of replacing sidewalks and streets, another bit of a challenging effort. How do you make those tools work? I think that's a big question here. And are there other options for affordable housing you're talking about?
Well, the gentle density that I talk about with duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, I think, I don't know why that would be controversial. I think that we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and I think that every neighborhood in Seattle should be sharing in that. And the reason why I call it gentle density is you can make them look like houses. They can look like the character of the neighborhood, but everyone's got to participate in this.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, you know, on the housing front, as far as developers are concerned, there's a balance between renters and developers. We want to make sure that renters can stay in place and live and work in Seattle, but we also want to make sure that the incentives are there so that developers keep on developing, because we need more housing.
Got it. Some thoughts about affordable housing, Kshama, please.
Seattle has been the construction crane capital of the nation 4 years running. Construction is booming, but what kind of construction? It is for-profit. The for-profit construction market has been booming. And in the same period, what we have observed, and this is not my opinion as a socialist, this is data, in the same period, what we have observed is that housing, especially rental housing, as we have talking about for the majority of renters, has become less affordable, not more affordable. In other words, the for-profit housing market has not only failed to solve the problem of affordability, it is actually the culprit in exacerbating the affordability crisis. And it's important to note that the skyrocketing rents have a very strong correlation with the explosion in homelessness. Studies have shown that every time rent skyrockets, you have a homelessness going up simply because people are getting economically evicted because they can't pay their rents, not because they have other issues. And so what we need is affordable housing, and we cannot just talk about supply of housing. We have to talk about how is affordable housing going to be generated. And I don't think it would be sensible to hold our breath that the for-profit market would increase affordability. That is why we're talking about a massive expansion of publicly owned affordable social housing. And to fund that, we need a tax on big business. But in addition to that, we also need citywide rent control free of corporate loopholes, which is why my office, along with other organizations, has launched a rent control campaign.
If you'd like to touch on that, you may. Is there a thought, Egan, you have?
No, sure. I mean, we've been building these last few years, right? And the proposition is, if we build enough, then the rents will stabilize, right? That's the for-market incentive and the structure. And last year, you saw that Seattle had the least amount of rent increase of most major metropolitan areas. It just went up by, on average, 1%, less than inflation. So it's working. And the data also show that when you have if you build apartments, for example, at all levels, housing of any sort at all levels, that you'll see that people will start to move their way up, and then it releases those more affordable units. That there's this mobility within the housing market. We just need more housing, and it needs to be at every level, and that's what we're starting to see.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to try to talk about an issue that I have not brought up yet. You'd like to discuss something that may not be hitting the headlines here. Egan, some thoughts about what you're talking about with constituents on the campaign trail.
Yeah, I think that there are big issues in some communities around safety.
Yeah.
And whether they're perceptions of safety or real safety concerns, this is something that I hear a lot. You know, families want to be able to go to the park and play with their kids and not worry about finding needles there, for example. Yeah. I know we've been talking a lot in the city just in general, and they've been talking at City Council as well about the police. And you know, Chief Best came out a few weeks ago and said that they're losing more cops than they can hire.
And they're gaining.
And you know, I think that we've seen with some of the incidents that have happened. Like there was a time like a month and a half ago when there was a stabbing in Cal Anderson Park, a shooting in Queen Anne, and another incident all at the same time, and the police were stretched very thin. So I don't necessarily think we need to grow our police force, but we do need to stabilize it. I think that we can use the police and community resources better to mitigate particularly violent crime. As you saw down in Oakland, they had a project called Operation Ceasefire, which is now Cure Violence, which massively plunged those rates of violent crimes. And I think we can be smarter about the way that we approach safety. It doesn't always involve more police.
Okay, thank you for that. Kshama, a question to you, another issue past the bigger headlines that we haven't been talking about yet.
Well, today is September 19th. Tomorrow is September 20th. tomorrow is the historic global youth climate strike, when students across the world, including in the Seattle public school systems, will be going out on strike and walking out for climate justice and to protest the complete and utterly shameful inaction by the political establishments throughout the world to address what is now a looming climate catastrophe. And I'm so proud to hear that workers are also walking out, going to be walking out with the students. I will be out there with them. And this, I think, will provide us more momentum to really push for a Green New Deal for Seattle's working people. And concretely, Green New Deal is not just a talking point. And I know a lot of corporate candidates are using this as a talking point. But concretely, what do we mean by that? We mean a major expansion of public transit, which will need a tax on big business. We need public transit to be fully electric and free at the point of use. We need to expand wind and solar. And we need energy retrofitting of all buildings.
Thank you very much for that. Briefly.
I'll be out there tomorrow as well. I think that it's a shame that the Seattle Public Schools is not letting their students come out without having their absence be unexcused. Because I think it's a real teaching moment. The kids are the ones that are going to inherit this world that we're shaping right now.
Yeah, and we need to wrap up the show here.
I have to say, it's quite stunning to see how these candidates, like my opponent, are really spinning these stories. I mean, he talks about movements and then he speaks against movements. He talks about movements and then he takes money from big businesses that have a long track record against movements. Some of the wealthy Republicans...
And this is your last statement, Kshama, in terms of why voters should support you.
This is very important.
Please.
This is not a laughing matter. This is serious. Some of the wealthy Republicans that have donated to my opponent have actually spoken out against and donated to Donald Trump, spoken out against marriage equality. Marriage equality was won through social movement building on the ground, despite the opposition of the political establishment and the big business forces who have no interest in creating equality. And so if we want Seattle to be a much more equal city, then we need to fight on the ground and and understand that we cannot trust corporate-backed candidates.
Egan, you get the last word.
I'm not saying that we don't need movements. We do need movements. I was part of the marriage equality movement here locally, a big leader in that. So I appreciate that. But when you're trying to address the issues of quality of life for the various neighborhoods around Seattle, you don't need a movement for that. You need someone who's going to show up every day to represent those voices at City Council. And I think that that's what's been neglected these last 4 years, and something that I dedicate myself to bringing to City Council. Yes, movements are great, but we need representation now in District 3.
Thank you very much for both of your opinions here, and we will be right back.
We need safe places for people if they're going to do drugs, because they're going to do drugs.
Make sure you can keep the flow of traffic moving.
Bicycle infrastructure, other kinds of infrastructure for non-motorized.
Public toilets would be appreciated in accommodated places.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Before we close today, it's time for our weekly Cio Poll. What's your chief concern in District 3? Homelessness, affordability, public safety, or something else? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and weigh in with your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next week, our election coverage continues with Council District 4. Alex Peterson and Sean Scott are fighting to represent Northeast Seattle and Eastlake for the next 4 years. Watch them debate here next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.